Welcome, alumni, parents, and friends.
Here for this Springboard social justice program here. It's important to name the program in case you're not in the right place. We're going to highlight Kate, Isabel, and want to make sure that we say a big thank you to Alan Brody, Bill Goodfellow, Nancy Franke, David Millstein, and Emory Mort, who are willing to be interviewed for this project. Some housekeeping details. We ask that you remain on mute until after the presentation. We'll be recording, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A afterwards. At this point, please feel free to unmute a question or drop it in the chat when we open the session up for Q&A, but not at this time. If you could, please rename yourselves with your name, class year, or parent year, as that applies, by hovering over your profile picture and clicking the three dots to select and rename. Okay. Isabelle Lewis, senior, is a member of the class of 2021. She is a member of the swim team, the Mercersburg news staff, and a prefect. She has a sister, Grace Lewis, who graduated in the great class of 2020, and a brother, Jack Lewis, who will be a 9th grader at Mercersburg starting next year. Thank you, Isabel. Kate Prentiss is a member of the class of 2021 as well. She plays soccer, squash, and lacrosse, is a peer group leader, a yearbook editor. Wish you guys did more, and vice president of the Marshall Society. Her brother, Campbell Prentiss, was a member of the class of 2020. Mr. John David Bennett is the Dean of Curricular Innovation and Director of Springboard. This is his 14th year here at Mercersburg Academy, and he is married to the Special Event Coordinator, Denise Bennett, and parent to Cameron Rogers, class of 12, Grace Bennett, class of 19, and Augie Bennett, class of 2024. And I will hand it over to Mr. John David Bennett. Thank you all again.
Good evening, everyone. I am John David Bennett. I teach a class in the Springboard program. Now, Springboard is one of our 2 senior capstone programs. I teach a class in that program called Mercersburg History. It's not a traditional history class. I don't stand in front of the class and teach the kids about the history of Mercersburg. Instead, we take sketches of stories, like the chapel walkout, or the story of Calvert Rogers, who was class of 1897, who was the first person to fly across the United States, or the first women of Mercersburg. We take these sketches, and the kids, they fill in those sketches. They tell the full story. For this project, Kate and Isabel came out of the summer inspired to find out who among Mercersburg's graduates had done significant work in social justice. This was a courageous choice beyond just the topic, because this wasn't the sort of project where they could just go down into the basement of the library, go dig through the archives, and come out with a box full of documents to base their project on. In fact, we didn't know where to begin. And I'll say we, because we had a lot of conversation at the beginning of this process. And I remember being on the 3rd floor of the library with about 5 weeks before the end of the term, and saying to Kate and Isabel, have faith, something will happen. We'll find somebody. And when I said that, I think I believed it about 80%. But despite the fact that at that point, we had nothing in hand, within a few days, they had enough, and then they had way too much. And they went from having nothing to having to curate, to having to make decisions about what to keep, who to talk to, and so on. So anyway, they can tell a lot more about this story. So let me introduce to you Kate Prentiss and Isabelle Lewis, class of 2021.
Hi, I'm Isabelle Lewis. This is my project with Kate. So I was originally, I'm the one that kind of came up with the idea of social justice. I was like trying to think of different ideas. I was gonna do like film stars or something like that at one point, but then I pretty quickly decided on doing the social justice project. And then Kate didn't really have any ideas. She was kind of like floating between. And then in the dining hall, she came up to me and asked if she could work with me, which was really great, because it would have been way too hard to do this without Kate, and she helped point me and kind of in the right direction, and we started doing the project together. So then we started looking for people to do the project on.
Yeah, I'm Kate Prentiss. I did the project with Isabel, obviously. So our first kind of step, like Mr. Bennett mentioned, we went to the archives and we're kind of hoping to find something there, but we didn't really have much luck. So we reached out to the Alumni Office of Advancement and Alumni Relations, and Mr. Brashatsky helped us a lot. He let us write an email that he then sent out to a lot of alumni. Basically, we just said we're interested in anyone who's done any work in social justice. We kind of kept it super broad just because we didn't really know where we wanted to go with it. And we got from there, we got a lot of responses, and we kind of had to narrow down who we tried to talk to everyone, but at the end of the day, we had to kind of narrow down who we wanted to focus our project on. So yeah, Isabel, do you have anything else? No. Okay, so now we're gonna show our slideshow presentation.
Hi, my name's Isabel Lewis.
And I'm Kate Prentiss.
Our project is on Mercersburg alumni who are currently or previously involved in social justice work.
This presentation is just a brief overview of their careers. If you want a more in-depth look, we have compiled a podcast for each person using the clips from their interviews.
The first people that we interviewed was a man named Alan Brody, class of 1964. After going to Mercersburg, he went to Yale. While he was there, the Vietnam War was going on, and he didn't really want to get drafted because he thought the war was wrong. So he ended up joining the Peace Corps and then spent 2 years in Ghana. After his 2 years there, he came back and didn't really know what to do, so he ended up going to Harvard Business School. And then he decided that wasn't right for him. And while he was in Ghana, he fell in love, so he decided to go back and try having a life there. After going back to Ghana, he got an offer to go to the University of Iowa for a PhD program, and he ended up doing that. Then he started working for UNICEF, and he worked for UNICEF for 22 years. His first job with UNICEF was working in Nigeria. He helped the states in Nigeria communicate about education and share their ideas so that the education program could be stronger within the country. He also worked on ORT promotion, which is oral rehydration therapy. He then went to Turkey to be a health programs officer, and he taught midwife training and promoted breastfeeding because breastfeeding started to disappear because baby formula companies would go to the hospitals and promote their products and give it out for free, and they were kind of brainwashing the nurses into thinking that that was better. So he worked on trying to promote using natural breastfeeding. His last job was in Swaziland. He worked on the protection of children caught up in the HIV and AIDS epidemic. Whenever he was in Nigeria for his first job, AIDS wasn't a big problem in Africa, but it had become a huge issue there, and it was destroying all the progress they had made in the country. So he used his communication skills to try to combat this.
Our next interview was with David Milstein, class of 1963. He graduated from Mercersburg and went on to the University of Pennsylvania. He then went on to Duquesne Law School and graduated from there and became a volunteer ACLU lawyer. When we spoke with him, he told us stories of a few memorable cases that he had. For example, he represented the KKK when they were denied a parade permit in Pittsburgh. And while he didn't agree with anything that the KKK stood for, he believes in the First Amendment. And he said that while they didn't have the right to make people listen to them, they had the right to hold the parade. Another case was a high school girl whose school forced them to shower in front of the other peers after gym class. Most people didn't see this as a civil rights issue, but he did, and it ended up becoming a national news story, and the school ended up changing their policy on mandatory showering and no longer required them. Another interesting case was a gender discrimination case. A man came to the ACLU who had been fired from his company for violating the non-fraternization policy. This basically stated that people of the opposite sex could not date. if they both worked at the office. When they refused to break up, the company fired the man. And so he filed a suit claiming discrimination because there was no policy against same-sex fraternization. So if he had been a woman, he would not have been fired because two women would have been allowed to be in a relationship. And then the last one that we talked about was a religious tax case where merchants in Pittsburgh were objecting to the fact that the sales tax in the state of Pennsylvania did not apply to some religious organizations. So in this case, it was bookstores. So bookstores who sold religious books had an advantage because they didn't have to collect sales tax. So he saw this as an issue of separation of church and state. This particular case ended up going to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and forced the state to change its tax code so that the sale of religious objects were taxed the same way as non-religious objects.
Then we talked to Emory Mort, class of 2001. After graduating from Mercersburg, he went to Cornell, and then he ended up coming back and teaching at Mercersburg for a bit. And then he moved to Portland and had a roommate who was really involved in protests in Portland. So through him, he ended up becoming involved in the protests as well. This group that he was involved in formed after the 2016 election. He worked on trying to reform the police in Portland, and this was before the protests that sparked after the murder of George Floyd. His group tried to improve police union contracts, set reasonable police budgets, and hold police accountable for their actions. He talked to us a little bit about his opinion on how the media was portraying the protests in Portland, and he said that they really focused on the negative parts, of course, instead of the positive parts, and like the violence instead of the peaceful parts of it. Also in Portland, they had a panel on one of the local news stations that was talking about the protests, and it was a panel of people of color. But none of the people on the panel had anything to do with the protests. They were just people of color who were high up in Portland. They wanted these people to answer for the protests. They were just random people who just had high up positions. The news also kind of used bad language. Like they used terms like riot and protest interchangeably and used words to make it seem more violent when it wasn't. After the death of George Floyd, the protests changed a little bit because they became more violent and more people were coming out. People that had no involvement in the protests used it as an excuse to be violent, and most of the people that were actually there to protest weren't involved in the destruction. Police were the main cause of the violence against them, like when the feds came to Portland, and it caused a lot of issues in the city. He told us a few of his own stories of the violence that he faced from the police while he was protesting. Like, he got shot in the abdomen by a rubber bullet once when he was trying to take a canister of tear gas and run it away from a group of people. He said that he got tear gassed for like 7 days straight once in the heat of the George Floyd protests.
The next person we interviewed was Bill Goodfellow, class of 1966. He graduated Mercersburg and attended Boston University, where he was a political science major. He decided to be a political science major because of the atmosphere in Boston. He didn't go there intending to be one, but he said Boston was a hotbed of activism at this time, which is sort of how he became involved in the anti-war movement. He said it was hard not to be swept up in what was going on, considering it was such a historic time in America. He said he was even arrested a few times. He was a volunteer for the George McGovern campaign, where he knocked on doors and drove people to polling places. And he says he didn't meet anyone who was voting for Nixon and thought it was going to be a landslide. So they were pretty devastated when he lost. He went to the Cambridge Goddard Graduate School for Social Change and then decided that since he wanted to be involved in politics, Washington, D.C. was obviously the center of that. So he decided to move there, where he worked for 3 years at a think tank that provided research for the anti-war movement. He and his colleagues wrote op-eds and reports. They testified before various congressional committees and worked closely with Democratic leadership. He then spent the last 6 months of the Vietnam War in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia before they had to be evacuated, and then closed the think tank because the war was over. He then founded the Center for International Policy in Washington, D.C., where he worked for 40 years. He says that he and his colleagues wanted to make sure that the lessons of the Vietnam War were not forgotten as they moved forward. So they worked on environmental issues, financial transparency issues such as money laundering, and then war and peace. He is currently working at an organization called the Afghanistan Peace Campaign because after leaving the Center for International Policy, he really wanted to focus thoroughly on Afghanistan. He works to try to promote a negotiated settlement to the war, and he says that they are moving in the right direction towards a withdrawal agreement.
The last person that we interviewed was Nancy Franke, class of 2002. She graduated from Gettysburg College in 2006 and then started working at Rosemont Treatment Center. This is a residential treatment center that had teenage girls who had committed a crime. She talked about how they were treated really poorly, both the workers there and the girls there, and she saw that they needed to be rehabilitated so they could be better members of society, but they ended up just kind of getting punished, and it was a really bad culture. So then she ended up leaving that center and joined the Peace Corps and went to Uruguay, where she built libraries and taught sex ed to the kids there. And then she came back and got a master's of social work from the University of Pennsylvania. She worked for a program that helped to support people before and after they were released from the Philadelphia Department of Prisons. She talked to us a lot about how the criminal justice system really needs to be reformed and that there has been work done, and she thinks that there's progressive people hired in Philadelphia that she thinks will do good work in helping to fix this. But she said progress is never linear or steady, but there has been progress.
We felt that there was sort of this overarching theme of the Mercersburg bubble. As students of Mercersburg, this sort of gets brought up a lot, and it's this idea that Mercersburg students are sort of unaware of real world issues because of sort of the safety net that the academy provides. And we wanted to ask those who we interviewed what their thoughts were because we had a wide range of graduating classes.
Bill Goodfellow said that he definitely agreed with our statement that there's a bubble on campus, and he said, when you were there, you're groomed to be bankers, lawyers, and doctors, not anti-war activists, but they gave you the self-confidence and taught critical thinking.
Nancy Franke said that Mercersburg can be its own bubble and is a place of great wealth and privilege. Simultaneously, the fact that I was able to meet people from all over the world and the country was such a fascinating and eye-opening experience. She says that Mercersburg opened her eyes to what the world looked like in a broader way that was beyond her upbringing in rural Maryland. This, in particular, was definitely something that many of the people we talked to mentioned. Just the fact that they were able to be in a place that introduced them to so many different people who weren't from the same places they were and didn't have the same upbringing that they had, opened their eyes and introduced them to new ways of thinking and new ways of living. And that was something that they couldn't have gotten if they hadn't been at Mercersburg. But at the same time, it is a place, like she said, of great wealth and privilege.
David Milstein said, when kids go to high school, the center of their lives is their school, their classmates, and their social activities. He kind of talked to us about how it doesn't matter what high school you're going to, you're going to have this bubble, and we're at the age where we're kind of just focused on ourselves and growing and who's immediately around us, and that it kind of, even though there is a bubble, that's an okay thing to have because it's normal and it's just how high school can be.
Thank you so much for listening and coming to our presentation.
We had a lot of fun working on this project, and it was very eye-opening and inspiring for us.
We just wanted to thank everyone who we interviewed and who spoke with us because this project would not have happened without them.
Also thank Mr. Bennett, Mr. Smith, Mr. Brashatsky, and the Office of Alumni Advancement for helping us find the alums that we talked to and helping us throughout the project.
Before we open this up for Q&A, just a a sense of how the class works, it is almost completely student driven. The students choose the stories that they'd like to tell. They spend, well, in a normal year, they would spend a couple of months researching, looking for that story. This year didn't have that opportunity because classes were only 9 weeks long. So we had to, they had to jump into their into their individual projects pretty quickly. But once the kids are into their projects, the projects become completely their own. I think that Kate and Isabel can confirm this, but on an almost daily basis, I'd ask them, so what can I help you with? What do you need? Well, we are preparing for our interview tomorrow with Alan Brody. Okay, great. And essentially they would turn me away, which frankly, when that happens, that's exactly how the class should run. The project wholly belongs to them. The project also includes multiple parts. What you saw tonight was the presentation that they had to do for the winter spring talk presentations. We actually have the next set of presentations for the students who took a Springboard class this last winter. Those presentations begin next week. But so they also have the full interviews, the podcasts that they edited, which are available. Any questions for Kate and Isabel, or for me?
JD, thank you. I'll get things started if that's all right with everyone. And again, Denise, questions can be submitted in the chat, correct? Or folks can raise their hand to be unmuted. Are those kind of our two options? I'll start with you, Kate, and then ask the same question of you, Isabel. What surprised you about your projects? And I'll leave it nice and open-ended for you to take however you'd like.
I guess the thing that probably surprised me the most was just how many different like topics can come out of social justice. Like obviously I knew it was super broad because we left it super broad, but like everyone we talked to seemed to have a different like sort of aspect of social justice, if that like makes sense.
Terrific, thank you.
I was really surprised about the impact that this had on me. I think after every interview, I like called my parents or told Mr. Bennett or both like, oh, I want to be like a lawyer now. Oh, I like want to work for UNICEF now. I was always like so impacted by all of the different people that we interviewed. And I still like think about all the interviews like every single day. And just like, they have really like shaped how like what I want to do for my future and just how I think about the world.
Yeah, I won't embarrass her too much, but and I won't tell you which interview it was. But after one of the interviews, the next day I asked her, how did it go? And she looked at me, she said, it changed my life. And she was so sincere. Like there was no going back to who she was before because of that single conversation.
Excellent. I guess Isabel will stay with you. Do you see more similarities or differences between stories of activism from different eras, from different generations?
I would say we had a bit more stories from further away from like current, but I would say that they're similar in some ways. Like I was really surprised, Mr. Goodfellow, his stories, I just was totally misinformed about like how much activism there was going on. Even though it was more like anti-war, there was still so many protests and stuff going on, which I just was totally unaware of back in the day. So I think there definitely has been a change, and we've seen like so many more protests recently, especially starting last summer. They really came to the forefront with the George Floyd protests. But I would say that from what I've seen, hasn't been much change. If anything, there's just more participation in the activism and more willingness for like the government to like actually change based on what's going on.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Isabel. Kate, how do you feel about the Mercersburg bubble? Is that different, do you think, than say a few years ago during Mr. Milstein's time, or the same?
Well, I think even just like for me personally, I felt like I came into Mercersburg as a freshman sort of in this bubble, and whether that was just me sort of getting older and like realizing that there is more to the world than Mercersburg, or if that is like the school's doing. I felt like through like the classes I was taking and just the like speakers that the school brought in, I don't necessarily think that there is that much of a bubble for me personally.
I think we'll see a lot of head nodding in terms of, for you, Isabel and Kate, your access to information that is, has changed a lot more over time. Mr. Bennett, any comments on either of those questions that come to mind? If not, no worries.
As far as surprises?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are always surprises in these projects, right? It's the best part of the job for me, because the kids tell me what they have found, and it's funny. I think besides Doug Smith, people come to me as like the default person to ask about Mercersburg history, which they shouldn't do, because almost everything that I've learned from the students' projects. So there's it's been I guess 7 years now of projects, but outside of what they've looked for, besides, I mean, yeah, I've done my own research work, but for the most part, yeah, every day is a surprise, frankly. It's when a kid, I mentioned the Calvert Rogers thing earlier. I didn't know, and it seemed like very few people on campus knew that the first person to fly across the United States was a Mercersburg graduate, and it was a kid who dug that up. Or the story that Abasanka told last year about Tom Leslie, the Mercersburg's first African-American graduate, and the documents that she found, the stories that she unearthed, the people who are willing to talk to her, who we didn't know were even out there until she started the project. It's just sort of elucidating, growing thing. And that was a year long. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing about being the person who facilitates, or at least just creates the container for these students to work in. I'm blown away almost every day.
Awesome. Okay, so from Holly, I'll put her on the spot. Maybe Mr. Mort, if I could pass this to you, what was it like for you to be involved in this program with students, and what did you learn through your experience?
Thanks, and congrats on the project to Kate and Isabel. When we talked, here in Portland, it was almost like being in the middle of and it still is to some extent, being in the middle of a low grade kind of civil unrest slash, real intense stuff going on. So it was a good opportunity to, by talking to students, it was almost like I'm talking to my younger self a little bit and reflecting from the outside. Because when you're in the middle of something, it's like, especially something you maybe didn't grow up preparing for, it's good to be able to reflect and talk to people who just have maybe some similarity in your background and have just like genuine open-minded questions. So I just remember the interview being like stimulating and a good opportunity to reflect in a different way on what was going on at the time. That was, I think if any of us backed up a year or two and we thought like a massive uprising for Black lives was going to be happening and we were going to be out having, guns pointed at us in the streets and things. And we would have said, no, that, you know, I'm not sure that's going to be what's going on, but that was what's going on. So I'll pause there, but yeah, appreciated the ability to connect the experience I was having now with the Mercersburg experience and just being an adolescent and where I came from.
Thank you. Thank you. David Milstein, what was it like for you to be involved in this program and with these students? Oh, David, can you unmute, please?
I thought I did that. I enjoyed it. I don't remember whether I told Kate and Isabel this or not, but one of the things I love about this school is not that it's like what it was when I graduated, but how much it's changed since I graduated. And to see students interested in activism and interested in these kinds of programs and looking to explore those kinds of issues, for me, was very gratifying. I mean, I don't remember how long I was on the phone with the girls, maybe 20, 25 minutes, half an hour or so. They asked some very interesting questions. And it just made me feel terrific to know that there were kids at school who think like this and who want to know more about this issue. That makes me feel really pretty good about the school and where it is. So I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you, David. All right, Kat Patterson, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I'm on my phone, so I haven't been able to figure out how to rename myself, but I graduated in 2018, and I was Kate's prefect when she was a freshman, so I'm so proud of you. And I just love hearing about what you've done with this project. So I have a question for both of you, and that is, how do you think what you've learned in this project, in this journey, is going to impact your future after Mercersburg? So how do you see yourself using this experience, whether it's in college or after college or before that?
Well, I think personally, before taking this class, I was thinking that I wanted to major in political science in college, but I was definitely nervous because I didn't really know what you could do with a political science major afterwards. So I think talking to so many people who are in various fields, it kind of reinforced the idea that I do want to go into political science, and that while I don't necessarily know exactly what I want to do after, there are so many options. So yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it was similar to Kate. I knew, I didn't fully know. I've been very indecisive with what I want to do with my future, and I still am after this. But it's really shown me that there are possibilities to go into social justice, and there's different. We talked to many different people, but the 5 people that were in the presentation, especially, they all had such different ways of being working in social justice, but they're all at the same time involved in it. So it just showed me how many different options there are for me if for me to pursue a career in social justice.
I'd love to ask you guys a question. Good to see you again. I feel like we've been estranged for the last year. I miss you guys, having taught them both in the spring of last year when we were virtual. But I'm interested in hearing from you how this has caused you, and I know you're at Mercersburg, so you don't get all the news that everybody gets. How has this caused you to view the events that we're living through right now? Are you seeing them in a new way because of the work that you've done?
Yeah, I think that I'm kind of going in with a more open mind to all these issues, especially with Emory Mort. I have been able to like see the protests and stuff. And like I've always been supportive of them, but I've like been able to see like them in a new light, and kind of like what's actually going on. He's proud of me with that. And then everyone else, for different reasons, whenever I like hear a story on the news, a lot of times I am thinking back to like someone talking about something, and how they have all explained it, like Nancy Franke talking about like social justice work. Whenever I hear social justice now, I think of her and her story. So it's all been pretty impactful.
Yeah, and just going off what Isabel said, especially with like Emory Mort and just him talking about how the media doesn't always portray things in like as how they actually are. So I've just been more, I guess, discerning of like the news that I'm hearing, and just trying to find a like wide range of sources before necessarily believing the first thing that I may see or read.
Thank you both, and awesome question, Ms. Stevens. Nancy, make sure that I don't butcher this here. Nancy Franke asked, what does social justice look like at Mercersburg today? Is it simply an increase in awareness, or is it paired with activism action?
There definitely is a lot of awareness and also action. I would say, going like back to Miss Stevens, she teaches a course called Quinn Ferguson, which Isabel and I both took, which like personally got me even more like invested in social justice, which kind of made me really interested in wanting to work with Isabel on this project. It's basically just a current events course where you kind of have like discussions, and she encourages like respectful discourse. And we also got to go to DC last year and hear a bunch of speakers. So I think programs like that increase awareness, and like the speakers that they bring in increase awareness, while also like giving you chances to make change where you see it necessary.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think we're more on the end of awareness than activism, especially this year. We're kind of trapped. We can't leave or anything, which isn't totally restrictive, but I think we're definitely more on the end of awareness, but there is activism, especially within like environmental change and stuff like that.
Nancy, how does that compare to your time as a student, or any context to your great question?
I don't know. I was having, it was interesting being interviewed. You all did a great job with this, and in the interview itself, I actually am a PhD student, and I do a lot of qualitative data analysis and a lot of interviews. And so it was funny to be on the other side of that interaction. Yeah, thinking about my time at Mercersburg, I was really struggling to think about what social justice looked like, what that looked like for me. I was there just junior and senior year, and I think I was just so wrapped up in, frankly, being really angry. I was at Mercersburg for a second because I was forced to be there, and then realizing it was amazing, and then being annoyed at my parents that they were right, and then figuring out where I was going to college, and just being able to enjoy those 2 years of being at such a special place. But I think that going back to this question of the bubble, I think it is challenging to figure out what activism looks like. I think no matter where we find ourselves in the world, it's hard to figure out what activism looks like within the context of our lives. And so whether that's going to protests or figuring out how to engage online and with other communities from afar, I just think it's a question for all of us forever. So I'm excited to see that there are courses that Allison and others are teaching that are trying to have students really dive into these issues. That's great.
Thank you, Nancy. Alan Brody, if I could put you on the spot, and certainly anything you'd like to share, but maybe just to highlight something, your op-ed as a student, I think discussing or debating integration, I think sticks out to me. And if you'd be willing to share any context around that. Can anyone else hear Mr. Brody? Oh, shoot. Hold on, we'll try to come back to you in just a minute. Back to Isabel and Kate. Has social media changed traditional activism for better or worse, in your opinion?
I think that's kind of a hard question to answer because I kind of grown up with social media. Like I don't really know anything different. I mean, I think it's made it easier to get involved just because it's kind of a choice, I guess, to be ignorant when you have so much information at your fingertips. But at the same time, I would say it makes it harder to figure out what is true and what is not true just because there is so much information and it is so easy to spread false information. So yeah, I can't, yeah.
Yeah, and I would also say that like there's people have been saying like social media activism, like people will just post stuff on their Instagram or whatever when they don't even like what Kate's saying, they don't even know it's true and they don't even actually do anything about it. Especially during going back to it again, like right whenever the George Floyd protests were in the heat of it, people were just posting stuff on their stories over and over again, which is great to get the information out there, but if it's not true, that's not great. And then if they're not doing anything that's actually helping the situation, then it's kind of pointless.
Thank you. Mr. Goodfellow, any thoughts, reflections here?
Am I unmuted? Yes. Okay, thank you. Well, yes, Mercersburg, for me, there was a bubble. Certainly, I graduated a long, long time ago, 1966. It was very similar to when my father graduated in 37. But what Mercersburg gave me was self-confidence. It taught me how to write and you know, a curiosity about the world. My roommate was French, and it sort of opened up the world for me coming from rural Pennsylvania. And then immediately after Mercersburg, I spent the summer in Europe, went to my first anti-war demonstration, first time, and all of a sudden I was ready for the world. Then I got to Boston University, and which was an amazing, all of Boston's tremendous hotbed of activity. But if there's one theme here for activism, I think it's once you get out of Mercersburg, because it's going to be a bubble, to travel. I notice a number of the other people who were interviewed have traveled. And for me, that's what's been the life changer. And it's just so important to see how other, not necessarily abroad, although travel abroad is key, but just travel out of your little circle, out of your life, out of your community. As Pennsylvanians, the only place we are taught to go is New Jersey. You got to get to the shore, but you know, there's a world beyond Pennsylvania. And you know, my travel is just the greatest fun part of what I do, even though I go to places like, you know, Afghanistan, which is not necessarily on the top of everybody's tourist list. But that's, I think, the game changer for people. Just get out there and see this other world, and you really want to become involved.
Thank you, Bill. Thank
Well,
you.
if I can.
Go ahead, JD.
Tim, if you don't mind, just to say thank you to all of the graduates who were involved in this project, and through you, all the alumni who have helped our students in Springboard, whether it's in Mercersburg history or any of the other courses, or to have a treasurer like Walter Bergen, who has so patiently and willingly worked with students every time he's been asked, and has been so supportive of the class and supportive of me in this class. So thank you for your time and your contributions. And if you haven't been part of a project and you're a graduate and you've attended this, I hope you have the opportunity one day.
Thank you. Thank you, JD. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for your questions, for your engagement. We hope you'll visit mercersburg.edu/events to register for more upcoming events. And also, please plan to attend one of the upcoming Springboard presentations, AKA Spring Talks. And Denise is throwing into the chat here. And folks can find this recording on our events website as well. Hope you all stay safe and have a wonderful night. And thanks so much for your sharing your great work, Isabel, Kate, and Mr. Bennett. Take care.